Collins & Co invite you to join us for our regular lunchtime not-for-profit seminars and workshops. In these sessions, guest speakers deliver expert knowledge on topics specifically catered for the not-for-profit sector. Sessions are held at Collins & Co from 12 till 2 and lunch is provided. Contact Collins & Co to find out the next seminar topic and to register.
As Michael said, my name's John and thanks for having us here today. It's really great to see everyone. I want to talk a little bit about why stories matter, and I'm going to start personally about why stories matter to me, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey of how I came to be part of this organisation, Youthworx, which, as Michael described, is a youth media social enterprise, and we train and employ young people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness in creative and commercial media. We have a training program, and then we've got a film production business where we employ graduates of the training inside the business. So we're a social enterprise model that's evolved over a number of steps and evolved out of a need to create, I guess, creative, engaging pathways for really at-risk young people. But I'm going to take a few steps back and kind of talk about how I ended up establishing this social enterprise, because it really is based around stories and how important stories are. And it goes back for me when I was probably in my early 20s. I was at uni, a bit lost, wondering what I was going to do with my life. And I was doing a drama and English double major, and I read a play by an Indigenous playwright called Jack Davis, and he's a Noongar playwright from Western Australia. And something, I don't know if I was just particularly receptive at the moment that I read it, but it was a really profound experience in terms of story. And what I felt was like, I felt like I was having my eyes peeled open by razor blades, if that makes sense, in a good way, which is a kind of almost a contradiction in terms. But I'll try and unpack that and explain what I mean. I felt like I was seeing Australia's story in a new light, and I was sort of almost seeing the blood on the landscape, and it was because I was hearing Indigenous voices firsthand. Indigenous voices representing themselves as opposed to being represented or being part of a museum sort of representation. And what I found so enthralling was the passion, the lyricism, and the power and the rawness of the voice. I found it so engaging, and it really got me in the guts. So that really sort of stopped me, and from that point on, I basically read every play I could get, every story I could get written by Indigenous writers, and I ended up doing a thesis on contemporary Indigenous drama as it was back in the 90s, so some 25 years ago. And from that, I ended up going on and teaching at a school called Northland Secondary College in Preston. And I don't know if people know the story of Northland, but that's also got an extraordinary story. It was a story I was exposed to when I was doing my dip ed. And Rafaela, the principal of Northland, came out and talked to us, and she talked about Northland. And Northland was a school that was closed down by the Kennett government when there was a range of closures. And during that period, they just based on economics, they went, let's close this school, and we'll just amalgamate. And Northland said, no way, you're not closing us down. And the reason they said that was because it was one of the only schools in urban Victoria that was having successful engagement with Indigenous kids and who were part of a community. And the government said, well, look, we'll give you your own code school and you can go and set up with your kids and do your thing. And they said, no. The reason we want to stay here is because we are part of a community where our culture is respected and shared, and we can share in that story. Anyway, that didn't happen, so they basically got kicked out. They kept running what became known as Rebel School on the school grounds, and then eventually they came and changed all locks, so they ran the school out on the pavement. Meanwhile, they fought it through the courts. People like Gary Foley, his son, they fought it through the courts, through the Equal Opportunity Board. Eventually, after 2.5 years of fighting, staying open with about between 30 to 60 kids and a couple of short but dangerous career educators who just bunkered it down and said, we're not moving until the school reopens. They eventually, 3 Equal Opportunity Board hearings that were successfully overturned, eventually they were allowed to reopen. So I heard this story about the school and I went and volunteered. And volunteered my time while I was finishing my degree there, and then a position opened. It was just after it reopened, a position opened up to become a drama teacher. And so I took on that role. And at that point, the school had to rebuild. It had to take on kids from everywhere just to restart, to kind of reactivate and rebuild its culture. So this determination to stay alive didn't come without its challenges, because they'd lost so much teaching, blah, blah, teaching stuff, everything. So when I came on board, it was a bit like the wild, wild west. It wasn't that uncommon to see a chair flying through the window, or so it was a really interesting place to sort of cut your teeth as a teacher. But I had a real passion for storytelling and for using story with young people to kind of start to get their stories, and that meant, so I started a drama program. I started working with these. I had 1 year to get this drama program up, and they said, if it doesn't, we'll give it a go. Let's see if we can get it activated. They gave me access to this big hall, and I had one elective group, a year 9 group that I could take on to try and get drama activated. And I had a whole bunch of just boys who just did it out of curiosity. And it was one of those situations where I'd open the door and they'd just run in, they'd start running around the space and going. So anyway, as they started to beat each other, I said, oh, let's at least throw some dialogue in and let's make it interesting. So as they were mucking around, they started to throw in dialogue like, all right, you be a cop and you're about to get him on, blah, blah, blah. So they started, you bastard, you're going to get, all right, that's good, let's script that up. So we started doing dialogue. Anyway, over a period of many years and a huge amount of effort and a lot of work with the career educators and a whole lot of artists, we started to work with those kids to shape stories. What was really interesting and what is going to lead on to this discussion today, and what I learnt through those kids, was how important representation is and how important your identity is, especially if your identity's been taken away. If you haven't had a voice, it becomes even more pronounced. In mainstream society, I guess sometimes people forget that. But if you've been a marginalised community for one reason or another, your voice becomes incredibly important because sometimes that's all you've got. And sometimes you don't necessarily have the vehicles to represent yourself. So I became very passionate about this idea of voice and about people being able to have the tools to authentically represent their experience and not necessarily be spoken for. And as with these kids that we worked with, if we were doing dialogue and you didn't get the right nuance of language, then they just wouldn't commit to it when it came to performing. So at one point they asked me if we could do Romeo. We'd been studying Romeo and Juliet, and they asked if they could do it in their words. So we rewrote it, and they had, hey cuz, let's go, Juliet, she's beautiful, eh? You know, that sort of thing, that kind of language. And they owned the language. So again, they were able to come to the party because they were able to imprint and own the language. The point that I'm kind of working up towards is who are you? What's your identity as an organisation? What language is going to best, how are you going to represent yourselves? Because authentic representation, I think, is the key to good storytelling. When you can represent yourself and your organisation authentically, then you're going to start to break through, because that's what people connect with. I don't think people, more and more people want to connect with the human element and the real story, So if you can get to that, if you can think about what are the stories that are real and really reflect who we are, they might not be a perfect kind of picture book, but if you can show that journey and show what you're aspiring to, you might not be there yet, but if you can show what you're aspiring to and what you care about and what you're passionate about, I think that's what connects people. So anyway, going back a few steps, after I left Northland, I ended up working with an Indigenous filmmaker called Richard Franklin for many years. And I don't know if people have heard of Richard Franklin, but he was a commissioner into deaths in custody and became a filmmaker and storyteller and all sorts of things. Incredible man. I spent about 5 years working with him, worked in Barwon Prison with Indigenous prisoners, writing stories, through to working with kids up in Swan Hill, Indigenous kids up there, writing stories up with them and films and so on. And then I got the opportunity to establish this organisation, Youthworx, and that came about when a little bit of funding came about to work with kids who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, around accessing radio, creative media, and through SYN, the community radio station. So there was this idea, SYN's this fantastic community, student youth network radio station. There was this idea that kids who are homeless have access to that. And there was a little bit of funding there. Salvation Army actually put up a little bit of money to say, let's get kids who are homeless at risk of access into SYN on the basis of tapping into their creativity. And I thought that was such an exciting and fantastic idea. But I also wanted to extend the idea, not just from radio. And the original outline of the project was just a little pilot project based around workshops around radio. And I thought, that's awesome, but we need more than that. Let's have film. Same philosophy, using creativity to engage young people. But the thing that I noticed very quickly was that, a couple of hours workshop for a kid who's disconnected is great, and you can kind of engage someone for 2 hours. They walk out that door at that radio studio or whatever, and in all reality, their story's not going to change much. it's a 1 in a million kid who can actually take a 2-hour workshop and turn that into a change in direction. So I thought about how can we build this, so we partnered with a TAFE and set up a training program where we could start to run a certificate too. We located ourselves in an old factory in Brunswick and set up ourselves to be a sort of collaborative learning space, got the TAFE on board, and then started running training. And then as the training was running, we ran a cert 2 for 6 months, and I went, Jesus, this is still not enough. These kids are just starting to bite. I can see them start, and we're creating this collaborative, creative sort of workspace, but it's not enough. We need more. So we built a cert 3, and then we built back a cert 1. And that meant a young person could come in for 18 months and train. So I decided to set up a business. That was back in 2009. And as I came from a teaching background, so I didn't particularly have a business background. So the business side of things I've had to learn on the fly. I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to make a business where these kids got to be part of the creative team and they got employed as part of that. When I had that idea, I got approached at the same time, coincidentally, by the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation to make a little film on homelessness, and they'd pay us for it. So we got to build the model as we went. So we got paid. I employed 3 young people from our training program, and they became the camera crew. They interviewed, basically did everything. And it became a prototype for our business. And to this day, that's the model we have. We have a training program, we have a business where graduates of the training go into the business and they work inside the business alongside industry professionals. We also have on-site youth workers, industry trainers and teachers. So we've got a sort of wrap-around model that's been a lot of juggling in terms of getting that model right, but essentially it's about creating a creative space and then creating a platform for these kids to have a commercial outlet. Now I'm going to show you examples of some of our work, and I'm going to ask you to start to think about your own organisation and think about. So I'm going to first show a little show reel, but then I'm going to show some selected excerpts from different. So since 2009, we've probably produced anywhere between 300 and 400 little short films for organisations. Nearly all, 90% would be not-for-profit organisations, social impact programs or projects. And that's just been a natural fit because of the nature of us as an organisation. There's just been this natural affinity, and that's the work we've got. And honestly, I love being in this sector because I love the stories. I love that we get the opportunity to interview Indigenous elders, that we get the opportunity to work for a human rights law organisation, that we get the opportunity to work with all sorts of fantastic organisations, nearly all who have a for-purpose model. So for me, that's really exciting. And what I also love is that our young people have come through our programs. They're learning to film and stand behind cameras, and they're working with clients on briefs, and they're scripting and doing every aspect of filmmaking, but they're also being exposed to the community sector and exposed to all the extraordinary work that I'm sure many of you are out there doing from day to day. And it's a really exciting time to start telling your stories. People want film content now. I remember when we started, 2009, so when we started, I approached Social Traders, who's a peak body set up to work with social enterprises, and they said, it won't work, you won't survive more than a year, so we can't support you. At the time they said that, and I muttered under my breath and said, we'll see. They have supported us in subsequent years when they realised that we were here to stay, but at the time they didn't think there was any need for organisations like us to be using video content. There'd be no market for it. And I wasn't someone who went, there's a market out there, I'm going to go and plug it. I was someone who went, these kids need experiences. I love telling stories. Let's put these things together and see what can happen. And we've stayed in business since 2009. So this is a show reel I'm going to show in a sec. At the start of the show reel is a little 30-second ad that our young people made. So the other thing I want to quickly reflect on is, we're a social enterprise, but we have to produce good quality content. We would not stick around if we didn't produce at a good level. So that means we have good equipment, we have great people. The young people we employ have generally spent 12 months inside our training program. And it takes that, it really does take that. But by the time they come in, they're really hungry. And sometimes we've got to get them up at 5:30 in the morning to go out and shoot, or we've got to go into lots of different scenarios. And they're there and they're on board and they're engaged. And they're getting an opportunity to turn their creative skills into commercial skills, food on the table skills. This little reel I'm going to show you, at the start of it, there's a little ad that our young people made about the organisation, and then it sort of shows a bit of a reel, so we'll have a look.
Youthworx Productions is a professional video production company and social enterprise. What makes us unique is that we train, employ and help to empower young people who have experienced marginalisation. If you're looking for quality video production services, we specialise in documentaries, short films, music videos and more, while making a difference.
Any problem we got to, there was always, we always found a way around it or through it.
You feel relaxed when you're working with plants because they don't judge you.
This will be another level for them little children to feel strong and proud to be black, and they're going to be something.
We are close enough to know what the piece is, and we are far enough away from it to have no idea how it's gonna go.
If nothing is done, we can be certain though in predicting that the already overcrowded slums and deprivation of rights will be the default option for those displaced.
Culture is like love. If you don't share it, it dies. When you share love and you share culture, it grows.
It was hung out on a daily basis, and it has written on it in big letters, Chas, meaning Charles, A, Pierce, Drapers, Slam Bam.
Participants on board were given the opportunity to learn how to film.
And cut.
Youthworx Productions, making better films, building better lives.
Before I keep moving on, and I'm really happy to make this quite interactive from this point on, I've got some other examples of things I wanted to show to kind of give you an idea of different ways that other organisations have approached either telling a story, illuminating a social impact cause that they're working on, or a little doco about a project. But at this point, is there any questions that anyone wants to throw at me now, before we keep going? Anything? Presumably, who put your hands up if you're kind of in marketing and communications? Okay, so that's pretty much most of you. So most of you would be pretty across the impact that, the importance obviously of story and that sort of thing. And I'm going to just now start to ask a couple of questions of you guys. What are some of the main challenges that you face as a marketing person in the not-for-profit sector? Anyone have it? Say again? Time. So as in having time to execute what you want to execute?
We've got heaps of ideas, but I'm a marketing manager, I've got another person working with me, which is quite recent. Yeah. And so how do you find time?
Oh, sorry. I was meaning to turn that off, not on.
How do you find the time to do everything you want to do? Because I think we've got amazing stories to share, and I think we've gone through the path of storytelling, and it's really been kind of a revelation for us for the past 2 years, I think, kind of visualizing it that way, rather than saying what we're doing, we're actually taking them on a journey, taking our supporters on a journey.
So you have been, and have you been doing the storytelling? Have you been putting up case studies? How have you been doing it?
So we're environmental not-for-profit, and we plant native forests, mainly to offset carbon emissions, but also to restore native ecosystems. And for us, what's been amazing is being able to show before and after, because we see a bale, and because I go and visit forests and I get goosebumps. It's amazing. There's a hill I was completely bare, and now you've got a beautiful thick forest with lots of animals and it's really alive.
So have you been able to tell that through film and stuff like that?
We're starting this year with racing it, so we're turning 20 this year.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very big milestone for us. So we're currently working on something. I've done a few in-house myself with Windows Movie Maker.
Okay, yeah.
Film, and that's actually worked quite well.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if we, there's more to embrace there.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting because I mean, obviously the passion for what you're talking about is there, and I'm sure again a lot of the organisations here would be, and time obviously is one of the critical factors. I think money's often a factor too. I don't know about you guys, but budgets are often a critical factor. Does anyone else want to comment on what some of their challenges are about telling your story, whether it's through film or other issues in the sector?
Yeah, for us it's actually getting access to the stories. So we're a membership organisation. We support people with disability to get active in sport and recreation. We don't run the programs.
Right.
We're a linkage advocacy organisation.
Yeah.
And so when we're doing our job well, our members are just kind of out there noodling around, getting on with it, just being active, and getting them to come back and to tell their stories, to be willing to participate in being, sharing their journey from I was inactive and I wasn't doing anything and it was impacting my health to I'm now doing something, name a sport or whatever it is, and that has improved my life in this way. Getting them to be willing to come back and share is really, really hard, because a lot of them are now like, well, this is just my life.
Yeah, right.
And
of course.
It's my life, and B, it's nothing really special, so why would I be sharing it?
Yes.
Because it's participation for the people who we've been able to help is now just kind of an ordinary thing, not an extraordinary thing.
Yeah,
so,
but for you, but there's obviously a story there to tell, isn't there?
But getting them to come back and say, yeah, I'm willing to share my story is really hard.
Yeah. We've worked with quite a few organisations too that haven't necessarily had access to direct participants and have wanted to try and shape or tell a story, and that can pose a real challenge. There is creative ways you can potentially do it, and I'm thinking of a couple of little examples. I'll try and show one or two in a minute, where you might, or for instance, one example that just popped into my head is we were working with Macaulay Family Services, and they wanted to show, they want to show that they impact women in safe housing, but they couldn't access any. For various reasons, it wasn't appropriate to have a direct story, and they had a minuscule budget. And when I'm saying minuscule, I'm talking minuscule. So we had to be really creative about going, okay, well, given that these are our constraints, we haven't got access to any people. We ended up using voiceover from young kids talking about, and I'll just show it to you and explain, and again contextually. These are challenges that we all face, and for us as I guess filmmakers and storytellers, our challenge often is to go, okay, well, given that you don't, you might only have a very small budget, or you've only got this time frame, what can we do? As well as, okay, means we can't have 20 dancing elephants in the background. That's going to cost too much for this budget. But anyway, not that you want 20 dancing elephants. Don't know where that came from. It's funny what empties out of your brain. Anyway, we'll try this little...
When I was 4, I went to stay in a refuge because my dad hurt my mum. I was scared.
1 in 3 women experience family violence, and when they do, so do their kids.
I am 1 in 4 children who experience family violence.
I am safe now. Macaulay Community Services for Women helped keep my family safe. We need your help to keep kids and their mums safe.
Help us keep kids safe by holding a pyjama day, by joining the fun run, host a movie night with your friends, hold a barbecue, or come up with your own creative ideas. Macaulay Community Services for Women makes kids matter.
Macaulay Community Services for Women keeps over 650 women and children safe from family violence and homelessness every year. Every dollar you raise supports these women and children.
So yeah, as I said, there were lots of constraints with that, and we're a very short time frame. But again, just going, all right. Well, how can we show some of these things? What can we do? What, you know, given that we've got limited time, limited money. We can't get access to any women to tell their story. So we end up coming up with the kids and the voiceover and the chalk drawing and trying to find some ways that were realistic that we could still try and convey some of who they were without it. Otherwise, it was just going to be a photo montage of their office, and it was kind of like, no, that's not going to cut it. So we can certainly do better than that. Again, there's lots of creative ways that we can tackle a brief once we know what people are trying to do. Any other challenges that people want to talk about in terms of telling your story as an organisation in the sector? Who's had success using film to tell their story, or who feels that they've used it effectively? Anyone? Yeah.
Some that I'm from Neighbourhood House Victoria, and they're all individual organisations, so we don't make stuff for them. They make their own stuff as far as they go. They're very diverse, but the ones that have done it well have done those 3-minute videos on Facebook and stuff like that, with varying degrees of professionalism. Some of them have done it completely professionally, some just done it on their phone. But the stories are so good that once you get people to the point of putting it down somehow, they work to in varying ways, and that's great. But obviously, if you could work with that kind of creativity, and that was fabulous.
Yeah.
It's a very limited.
Yeah, very limited.
Simple and beautiful.
And I'll show you another example of in a sec of another one where again very limited budget, limited access to people, and again trying to kind of put that creative lens on it. And I must admit, for us, we love it when we get an opportunity to try and apply something creatively. We'd love to work with more money, honestly. It would be awesome. I'd love to have, I'm not saying I love working with small budgets. I'd love to work with bigger ones too, but it was, look, honestly, that was about 1,500, which in terms of film terms is very, very small. And honestly, we stretched ourselves to do that for them. Everything I'm going to show you now would be under 10 grand in terms of budget. Again, 15 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. We couldn't have sat in this room and had this conversation. You couldn't have done what we do for the sort of money that we're talking about. So what's happening in the space is that it's becoming more affordable. The quality of the tools that you've got available are more affordable. We've got a studio decked out with beautiful cameras and lights and all the gear that you need to produce at a really nice level, but it doesn't cost the earth. But it's still about stories at the end of the day, and it's still about how do we tell a story, and at the end of the day you can have great production values, and that's going to help. But at essence, it's really about what is your story. So and I guess the question is to ask yourselves, if you are going to try and represent yourself in film, is what is going to represent us? Is it a case study of a young mum who we've been working with, and is it just a little 3-minute story about their journey and how they've re-engaged with the community through the blah blah blah, or is it our staff talking about the work they do and we're getting visuals of it? And sometimes that's the best that we can get. Is at every turn you're faced with logistics, budgets and timelines, so always we've got to, we're mindful that you guys are often working with small budgets, and so like I always say, well, what can we do rather than what can't we do? Sometimes that means I say, well, then all we can do with that is we can come out and film for an hour and we can get a couple of interviews and we can put together a little 2-minute piece about what you do. And sometimes that's great, like you can still get fantastic content, sometimes it's just a couple of interviews and some overlay, and you get a beautiful little piece that talks about your organisation. And honestly, that can be so great if you're presenting at a conference and you're talking about a project you've done. and you've got just this lovely little piece. It's really nicely produced, and it's done quite simply, and it didn't cost the earth. Still costs money, but that can communicate often so much more effectively than trying to tell someone. I'll show another example of it. This was another brief where we had where we had quite an open brief actually, but again, limited budget, but this time it was about delivering a social it's sort of anti-violence kind of messages. And again, how do we do this without just putting stats as text on the page? So they wanted to try and, it was St Kilda Legal Service, and they wanted to try and communicate some statistics around violence and women and so on. And so we ended up with these little scenario-based pieces. So I'll show you this.
Where are you going?
I told you already, I'm going out tonight.
Who with?
With Caitlin.
Why? You spoke to her this morning and you saw her last weekend.
Yeah, she's my friend.
Why don't you just marry her then?
God's sake, what's your problem?
You're my problem! Look, I don't want you to see her. You moved in with me.
Does that mean I'm not allowed to go out anymore?
Come on, just stay here with me. You know, we'll watch a movie. Come on.
I've already arranged this, and I'm already late.
Yeah, well, if you go, don't worry about coming back.
They've got a mind of their own. But yeah, again, so in the next couple of scenarios, the next one, there's a girl who, against her will, has had sex with a young man. He walks out and then turns to her back, and you've got the statistic on her back, you know, like a tattoo on her back. So it was trying to find creative ways of, rather than just having the stat up as a piece of text coming up, or just having people talking about violence, you know, showing it through these little scenarios. So again, that relatively small budget again, it was more than the last one I talked about. And there were three little, so we worked on created little scripts. They went for approval, then we shot it. We ended up getting some actors sort of who pretty much donated their time, again, because the budget wasn't there. Any other questions at this point?
What would you use such a long piece for?
Yeah, people don't, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So this was kind of part of a broader suite of projects that Aboriginal Affairs Victoria actually did, because they're trying to preserve it was a cultural heritage project. So it was part of, they asked us to work on preserving a number of projects that were happening around Victoria. And so this had more that doco historical kind of context around it. So this was like I think it's a 10, 12, maybe even 12-minute piece. So hence the brief was different. That's an interesting point. And again, you guys would be noticing it too, but I'm noticing even a few years ago when we started, we were making quite a lot of 5 to 7 minute films. Increasingly, it's getting down to 30 seconds. You know, you've got 30 seconds. People's attention, you know, just want something told quicker and quicker and quicker. There's a lot more campaign pieces now that people are wanting to do, say 4 little 30-second campaign clips as opposed to a 5-minute doco. Having said that, I think there's still some forums where people will use that kind of context. We still do quite a lot of 2 to 3 minute pieces, and they're great. They're great for the more, you know, your conference context where you're talking about what you do and you show a little film about it and that sort of thing, or on your website, that sort of thing.
What about for email purposes? For email purposes,
people. It's getting down to 90 seconds and down. You know, like that's what I'm finding more and more. We've just been asked to produce a whole lot of stuff that's in that 30 to 90 second bracket. But like I said, more and more we're getting asked to produce like a series of little campaign pieces as opposed to one longer piece. And for me, it's kind of like, well, we can do either way, you know, whatever suits best. We just kind of go, well, okay, what's your time frame? What's your budget? What's your, you know, and in a way, I guess, in terms of how I think about working with not-for-profits, like I say, I've got a great empathy for not-for-profits, having being one myself, loving this sector. I also understand a lot of the challenges. I also understand that a lot of the time organisations we work with have to go and find funds to do something. They've got an idea, and sometimes that might be a 12-month process between the time we've first spoken and they said, oh, we've got this idea, we want to do this, but we're going to need to go and get apply for a grant or do this or that. And we're that's absolutely, we totally understand that type of context too. But yeah, it is definitely getting shorter. The challenge then is to say what you want to say in that short period of time. And in some ways that still requires a fair bit of thinking to get your message down to your 30, if it is a 30-second piece. Like sometimes a 30-second ad can be harder than a 3-minute piece. Because what you say, is that a fair comment, Michael? You think? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot more. I think there's a lot more planning in shorter pieces. Yes, the script has to be a whole lot tighter.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more in the development of it, and so sometimes, because I think they don't actually end up cheaper for the shorter amount of time because of the extra man hours to bring it together.
Yeah, and in fact that's something I think a lot of the time there's a generic sort of film that we can make about we could almost make about any organisation, and that's a 2 to 3 minute piece where we literally come in and film for half a day based on a project with some interviews and some overlay and really nice quality, and you're looking at anywhere generally between 3,000 and 5,000 for a piece like that. That's where our sort of market space is. But then to the ones that where you want to script it, even say an ad, is actually, there's a lot more work in the actual, like Michael said, the development phase is where it is. If we're just coming in, you're running this great little project that's already existing, and you can say to us, yeah, on this date we want your crew to come in, and I've got these 3 people, I've got a facilitator, I'm going to interview a participant and the CEO. 3 interviews, and can you get some overlay of the activities happening? And we can do that, you know, like that's a really beautiful, simple project to do, and that's where you can keep the costs down because there's not all that development, planning, scripting. When you're starting to script and plan and develop, then that's when the time goes into meeting, talking, you know, working through your ideas, really thinking about what you're trying to say. So there's a whole pre-production element that's a lot more exhaustive, I suppose, and then you're reflecting on your branding and all those things in a different way. Any other questions at the moment?
I find it just as truth how you narrow down the message, because we tend to always want to talk about all the wonderful things we do, but it's really hard to just focus on one thing, which is what we're going through that process at the moment with a professional filmmaker, and it's asking me what are the key messages? Well, this, that, and that, and that, and then it's like, Ellie, you only have 1 minute.
Okay, that's a really good point. I'm going to actually hand out a little handout. It's only got a few things on it, but oh yeah, thanks.
And I would say on that, Elaine, that one of the things in that is...
Actually, I'll keep one so I know what I'm talking about.
About what it is you want to communicate. But also coming back to who you want to communicate with, because if you've got 3 bits to your story, they might not be relevant to your entire audience. So starting with who your target audience is might help resolve some of that. I'm curious to know how many people, when they start to scope out a project, spend a lot of time just trying to get consensus what the project should look like and what it is you're trying to say.
Honestly, my response to that question is also sometimes it is less is more, and you want to leave people wanting to know more than trying to hit them with too much information, if that makes sense. Sometimes I think there's this temptation to think, I've got this one shot at making this film, I've got to pack every bit of information, and I need the CEO to speak, and I need this person to speak, and I need that person to speak, and I need all this text to say all of this information and communicate every bit of who we are. Audiences don't want that. They want a little story that they can that they can relate to the story, and they can get your essential, like the before and after for you, you know, and the emotion of that is enough as a story, you know, in a way. So how do you capture that story and then you go to find out more, and you've got links on your website, or you've got, you know, that's what I think is that sometimes use film for what it's best at, which is to get that response and get people engaged. don't try and use it as a PowerPoint presentation with lots of text. And Sorry. No, that's all. I think that's probably all I was at it.
I attended a webinar recently on trends in social media, and one of the things that is taking off exponentially is the use of video online.
Yes.
And the point that was made by the presenter was that most social video is consumed without audio, because you're watching it on the train, you're watching it on the bus, you're walking along, and increasingly audio is not being used, but the video is.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, have you noticed anyone
We've-
coming to you going, we need to have something that really works without sound, or we're not doing sound?
Look, those conversations are happening, and they're happening more when we're talking directly to marketing. That is the marketing, in the marketing space at the moment. Definitely, that conversation is starting to go around. We haven't directly been asked yet to do films that are purely focused on the visuals. I think what that is a reminder is that film is a visual medium, and that we've got to be cognizant of that, whatever we produce. But so far, no, we haven't had to do with that. So what some people are starting to do in that space is have just grabs, little text popping up, or some subtitles, or and just focusing on the visual storytelling. But yeah,
Jon, does
it's
that
coming.
style lead more then to animation?
Yeah, infographics and animation. Yeah, it would lead to that sort of stuff. Actually, on that note, I'll show. We don't. Actually, Michael's does some great animation through Skies. We don't necessarily focus so much. It's not our speciality, animation. We've done a few projects. What we tend to do in that space is we tend to get someone from outside, so it's not part of our core team. As I said, our core team, at the moment we employ 5 young people who've come through our training, 2 full-time and the others part-time, and they work on these projects alongside another producer and myself and a broader team we've got. But in the case of an animation, if necessary, we will pull someone in from outside to work with us. What I try and do, because of our enterprise model, is I try and get the skills past, I get them to do some work with our young people. So I'll show you an example of that. We did a motion graphics for an organisation called Displacement Solutions. They're an international human rights law organisation, extraordinary organisation doing work in climate displacement. And they wanted this motion graphics piece that we did, and we got someone from outside. But then now the next piece we've done, which I haven't got an example of here, our young person has now taken on the motion graphics. So it's sort of a handover process. And I'll just show a little bit of this. I won't show. Yeah, we'll show a little bit from the start, and then I'll probably jump in a bit further because it goes a bit long.
We all know about global warming, and it isn't pretty. We all know that we're living in a time of great changes to the world's climate. Weather patterns are changing, sea levels are rising, polar ice and glaciers are melting. There's more flooding, more drought, more extreme temperatures, more frequent and vicious storms than ever before. It's happening in Dhaka, Bangladesh. It's happening in Newtok, Alaska. It's happening in the Carteret Islands in Papua New Guinea. It's happening in Gadi Sugdup, Panama. It's happening in South Tarawa, Kiribati. Australia's Torres Strait Islands are already feeling the impacts of climate displacement.
Yeah, so those motion graphics, so we didn't have the capacity ourselves, I think, to deliver that level of motion graphics. So we got some, like I said, we got someone from outside who worked with us, and then he's taught some of our guys in our team some of those skills now, which is fantastic. So so now we're starting to be able to do some motion graphics as well. So which again for me, in terms of our social purpose is about not only obviously making the product, but it's about the young people inside our organisation being part of that skills transfer and so on. Any other questions at this point? Or any, how are we going time-wise?
So we've kind of set it until so it runs out the door by 2.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm just trying to think if there's any other examples of different types of films that I can show you. Oh yeah, okay. So this, I'll show you, this is more, again, a simple kind of piece, organisational piece about Doxa. Some of you may know of Doxa. But where this, again, in terms of a style, and this is more a traditional just promo about an organisation, based on that go and shoot interviews and overlay, but they also did a little bit, some scripted little sections where they got their staff to, you know, follow the script, so to speak, and you'll see an example of that. Okay, so what I want to say about this one in terms of time is we made a 3-minute one, a 90-second and a 30-second, I think, you know, of the same piece. So, and that's increasingly what's happening too, more and more, is organisations saying, oh, we want one for our website, it's going to be 3-minute, and we want a shorter one as well that we can just put on our Facebook page, or, you know, so there is different purposes. You know, people are starting to think about, you know, consuming in different ways and different time frames, and having, and that, the beauty of that, if you think about it ahead of time, is that you can potentially use the same material and you can come out with a few different kind of ways of cutting up that material. Or if you're filming a longer form piece, getting some little bite-sized pieces out of it as well. If you're shooting, you know, if we're shooting a doco over a period of time, you can pull out little chunks and create little bite-sized 30-second, 60-second pieces out of that material as you go as well. Yeah. Now, sorry, I actually distracted myself, which happens a lot. But this piece of paper I gave you. So on the front page, there's some quotes, and these were just things that I was thinking about in relation to storytelling. And there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I just love that quote. I think that for me reflected back on what I was talking about in terms of how I got involved in storytelling and through Indigenous storytelling, and the fact that there was silence in this country for 150 years. And when a community or is silenced, or when those stories go underground or they're lost, that creates this tension, I think. And over time, those stories need to come out, and they need to be represented. They need to be told. How that applies to the not-for-profit sector is, I'm drawing a long bow, but I think a lot of the time the stories in the not-for-profit sector are underrepresented, often because we don't have the budgets or the time to tell these stories. And there's so many, I mean, we're so privileged because we see these all the time. We see the fantastic work that people are doing, and so I think in that sense, those stories a lot of the time are untold. You know, the challenge again is for you guys to think about is, yeah, how do we tell them well, and how do we and that's our challenge too, obviously, as filmmakers and stuff, is how do we help you to tell them well. A story should have a beginning, a middle and an end, but not necessarily in that order. I love that too, because again, I mean, the whole idea of beginning, middle and end, but how do you frame, like even that story, that the Tanderum, the doco, starts off at the end in a sense. You're seeing the performance, and then you go back in time to find out how you led up to that performance. So often you want to shift around the narrative and what's the best way that we can tell a story. If history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. I think, again, this is why storytelling is so important for your organisation, is people will often walk away with more emotional connection to your organisation if it is based on a story than it is just telling them facts and figures or standing there with a PowerPoint and just hitting them with statistics. I'm not saying there's not a place for that, there is, but I think it's often stories that emotionally connect people to what you're doing. Certainly for me, that's the case. If we go over the page, this was just some very brief do's and don'ts. Timeline and budget are always, you know, like, you just can't escape the reality of those the two key factors that are going to impact on your filmmaking. Where possible, show as well as tell. So again, sometimes there's a temptation to just have talking heads, people talking about what you're doing. And that's the easiest in terms of, you know, just get in and do the interview. It's sort of easy, but as much as possible, you want to show some action as well. You want visual. Were you going to say something, Lara?
Just wondering if you have any tips about how to actually film a good.
Well, then it comes down to it's simply it's as simple and Tim might back me up on this, but it's just about framing, lighting, sound. You know, in terms of the technical side of it. It's about just the composition of your shot. So thinking about those things. And then audio is terribly important too. If you don't get decent audio, I mean, you can get away with a bad picture more than bad audio. If people can't hear it properly, that's terribly important. And it's something when you first start out in filmmaking, I think nearly every filmmaker kind of has that dawning moment where they go, oh, okay, sound is really important at some point. So sound, but then it's about composition, framing, and then it's about just being relaxed in terms of interview techniques, I think, and making people feel comfortable.
Jon, sorry, just quickly. We were involved in a project last year with an organisation, and their CEO, very engaging, very dynamic, but couldn't shut up. And so we really had to be quite strict on him and his staff about how much time he was going to have and what was available to him to actually get the message off. Because they'd done a video project 6 months or 12 months beforehand, and he just rabbited it on. And it was so dull that they basically stopped showing it to people. So we've had to be really tight to say, you've got 30 seconds, 40 seconds max. And so they actually created a script for him and made him just kind of read the script, even though he practiced it so it didn't look like he was reading it. But scripting people is sometimes a really nice way.
That's definitely sometimes an option. And yeah, absolutely. And also another bit of advice I would say on that is limit the amount of questions you ask. We usually go only, like if we're doing interviews, we usually only ask 3 questions, about 3 questions. And if sometimes there's a temptation to ask 20 questions, what you end up with is a 2-hour interview where you're going to use 20 seconds anyway. And usually, if you ask the right questions, you'll usually get the information in your 3. Tell us about your project, question 1, and you'll get a fantastic response. You don't have to necessarily go, ask 20 questions. And honestly, that's our experience. Is less questions is usually better. You get a better quality interview and people are more concise. Sometimes you'll need to go over a question a couple of times. You might give people a couple of opportunities if they're struggling with it and stuff like that, and that's fine too. But yeah, so firstly it's about composition and the technical side of it, and then it's about the person feeling comfortable, because yeah, you want, at the end of the day, you want people to feel natural, and if they're scripted, you want it to feel reasonably natural, and that can be hard too. Yeah, so some do's. Show as well as tell. Aim to, I think what I said at the start, aim to represent yourself authentically. Like I'm a great believer. I hate bullshit. I hate I hate it when people sell themselves like this, and this is the reality. If you aspire to be here and your reality at the moment is here, talk about what your aspirations are, but don't pretend for me, that's a personal thing. I much prefer people to be real and authentic and engage from that real kind of space. That's a personal thing. I don't know if that's a marketing thing at all. That's just what I believe. And try not to preach too heavily. So again, that comes to showing the great work you do, as much as telling. Like if people connect to the story of what you do, rather than you telling them, oh, we're wonderful, we do this, and this. But if you show them a story and they go, oh, you're wonderful. That's a better response, if that makes sense. So if they see your story and they go, oh wow, that's really amazing what you guys are doing, isn't that fantastic? That's the kind of response I think you want out of your content. So treating your in that sense, treating your audience intelligently, and leave people wanting to find out more. Don't think you have to. You've got 3 minutes to tell them every intricate bit, every key message in your vision plan, every. You can't possibly do that, but you can get them connected to your vision, and then potentially interested in wanting to know more about your organisation, who you are, if that makes sense. So yeah, in that sense, less is more. Avoid too much talking heads. So that's what the example that Michael gave, the CEO who just kept going and going and going. And overusing text on screen. Again, I think we've got to be careful. Sometimes people want massive write-ups of all this information. Just little bits of information is all we can absorb when we're watching.
What about captions?
Captions, yeah, again, look, I'm no expert when it comes to captions. We have used them sometimes. You can also, there is a service on YouTube you can get to subtitle, caption your pieces after they're produced. Yeah.
And it's absolutely terrible and you shouldn't use it.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
It's dreadful.
Is it? Oh, really?
From an accessibility point of view, you should be captioning everything anyway, and if you want to be a AAA rated website, for example, you should be having not only captions but the transcript.
Yeah.
But you're better off not having captions at all than using the YouTube one. It's
dreadful.
Really? Okay, that's interesting to know. We tend not to have the budgets, honestly, to be able to caption as well, because it is time consuming to do it ourselves. And we haven't usually, we've sometimes passed films on that have then done, or transcripts on that sort of thing, but usually we're working in a context where we don't have the capacity to necessarily do that. If it was thought of ahead of time and it was budgeted in, then we could do it. But yeah, if that makes sense.
There's a website which is $1 a minute per transcript called rev.com, which is pretty good.
Oh yeah.
American-based one. So you just upload your film and they work out the cost and they just spit out a really good transcript.
Oh, that sounds better than the YouTube option then.
YouTube's free, obviously, but
yeah.
$1 per minute, so
yeah.
Time used it.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, like I said, thinking you have to explain everything. You don't need to explain everything. And making a piece too long, it's more of a mistake to make a piece too long than too short. And again, that sometimes is that we know and care and are passionate about what we do, but unless we communicate that effectively, other people often will tune out. That's just reality. We've all got so many things going on in our head. So they were just a couple of key things. Then the other thing I wanted you to, I'm just going to hand these out quickly. And these are just some of the things that, this is obvious stuff for you guys if you're marketing. So I'm not inventing inventing anything new here. These are just some of the things that I would sit down and talk with you about. If you came to me and said, I want to make a film, these are some of the things that I would talk about with you. We actually have a creative brief template, and I've just dragged some of that onto this little format here. So 6 boxes, top corner, purpose. Why are you telling this story? So obviously the why of what you're doing, and we've talked about that a bit. Why are you telling it? Because we're doing this fantastic work where, working with reforesting and the carbon emissions, and we want people to understand and know about that. That's your why, your purpose for telling this story. Who is our audience for this story? Again, as Michael said, I think at the start, and I think again, you guys are all marketing. This is not rocket science. You know that it's important that if you're, who you think about who you're pitching to, and what age group, what demographic, all those sort of things. The key messages. Again, I don't get too caught up on the key message at the expense of the story. Like sometimes we lose sight of that. We want to, I've got to get this key message in, and we're almost forcing the key message. The best method, I reckon, is if you find a story where the key message can be drawn out of the story. Does that make sense? So if you can find a story about a participant or about something that your organisation has impact, and someone could look at that story and draw out the key message, that's more powerful than telling them, your key message. Does that? Yeah. So let the story tell the audience what your key message is. Then there's all those different options around the information, what you're trying to communicate in terms of different styles of storytelling. I've showed a few different examples from some scripted pieces through to doco style, etc. Then what kind of mood do you want? And then that'll obviously, the little Macaulay piece I showed you started off much it was darker because the content was darker. And then it progressively got lighter as the little piece went on. But what kind of mood do you want? And that's obviously your music, your style of filming is going to affect that, all sorts of things. So they're the sort of things you think about. Who will feature? I think you were talking at the back there about your organisation not being hard to get access to the right people. But, again, who can you get who can tell your story, And then it's the practical things like your time, what's the time frame? If you came to me and said, we've got a week to do this, then that's obviously going to be different to if you said, we've got 3 months and this is what we want to do and we want to think about it and we want to script it and blah, 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 et cetera, through to what is the final outcome that we want. And I'm going to show you one final, actually I might show you 2 tiny little pieces and then we'll finish up, right? So, where is it? So this one, this is an example. This was an interesting. Oh wow! Just going to do that thing again. Sorry. It's like turn it on and turn it off. This is a little piece that we did again, tiny. This was a small budget. But this is one where it was an organisational profile. It's about Youthworx, which is an organisation that works with Pacific Islander young people. But they wanted to show this program they run called Emerge, where young offenders, they start to work with them and provide them support as they go through the courts and that sort of thing. So they, and rather than just tell them this is what they wanted to sort of, show a kind of almost like a scenario of how that plays out. Again, such limited resources. Like you'll see how we've had to make a cop like a police siren and things. Anyway, we haven't got Hollywood budgets, put it that way. But still, there's creative application.
Kids, we need to hurry. We've got church. Where are they? Kids! Ah, there you are. What's your brother, Shuni? Let's go. Come on. Hurry up.
Tilly, shouldn't you be at church? What for? You don't even go to churches. True. But do you want to get a feed, bro? Well, bro, your show.
Is that us?
Nah, Sully, not. Nah, none of that, man. None of that also.
Hard and fast, in and out, bro.
Sully, I don't know where. I got you. Sully, wait.
It was so dumb. I wasn't even hungry. I mean, we were just bored. I always got into trouble when I was with Honey.
When they're first meeting families and meeting young people, they use that as part of their kind of induction, if you like, into what they do. And apparently they said that's been really fantastic for them to help explain, just give a quick picture of the type of program and context. So yeah, again, so that's an example of something that's promoting a particular program, but builds in a scripted kind of piece alongside it. I'm just going to show you one more thing, and this is I'm diverging a little bit here, but this is as well as doing all this organisational stuff, we as an organisation are moving into our own creative narrative space as well. And we self-funded a project a year or so ago with an Indigenous storyteller called Buri Monty Pryor, who's was Australia's first ever children's literature laureate. Extraordinary man. Where's his? I just want to show you something quickly. Where is it? Okay, so, and this is his biography. And 20 years ago, I read this when I was a teacher at Northland. And on the front cover, it's got a few of his family members, and two brothers, a sister, and a nephew all committed suicide. And so he talks about that in the first chapter, and that's unfortunately quite typical of a lot of Indigenous families. Buri's become this extraordinary storyteller who goes into schools and is incredibly inspiring and funny. He's like an Australian version of Richard Pryor in terms of he's just got such a great sense of humour and brilliant at working with kids. I got him in when I was teaching at Northland and saw the impact that he had the kids that I was working with then. And then became friends, really, and we've worked for many years together on a whole bunch of projects. And then he was telling me a story about the impact he had on an Indigenous kid out in a country school in New South Wales, actually, who, after the storytelling session, started to engage with reading. Anyway, I'm going to show you, we did a trailer about, we did a where is it? We self-funded this short film. It's a 16-minute film, and John Wood, the actor, got involved, and a few other people got on board and came on board with us. And then that's led to now us being commissioned by the ABC to do a series about him with another production company. Yeah, so it's a really sweet little story. But so that was a bit of a labour of love, that one, and it was a bit crazy to do, but anyway, we did it. And it's but yeah, beautiful representation of the work that Buri does in schools and stuff like that. So we are trying to, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're also trying to move into that creative narrative space ourselves as an organisation. Ultimately, I want the young people that we work with to be armed and dangerous with the tools that they've got now. We've got the business, the infrastructure and the training. One of our young people has just got funding to do a pilot series called North about a group of no-collar, as he describes, a group of no-collar dysfunctional young people growing up in the north of Melbourne, which parallels some of his own life experiences. And he's got, about 20 grand to make this pilot episode that we're going to then try and leverage to do a whole little series about, which will employ all young people as all the creative and all the creative roles and stuff like that. So that's where we're trying to push to as well. Anyway, I think I'm done. Unless there's any, is there any questions that people want to ask before we finish?
I noticed not that one but the other ones, there was always the logo of the organisation when you begin the short film. Is it an obligation? Is it
No.
practice?
No, that's just, we're just guided by whether it totally depends on the organisation, and some do and some don't. And it really depends on you. I mean, obviously people are attached to wanting their logos there. I think sometimes they get overused, but again, at the right time, obviously it's really important that your logo is front and centre. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask about how you go about getting started. Do you have any advice?
Okay, so yeah, look, it really varies. If you think of across the different things I've shown you today, there was stuff from natural sound, like the Tanderum one, the Doco, where you've got the beautiful ambient sound of the singing, and we could draw off that. That's the best case scenario if you've had permission to film and you're able to use that as well. Through to that Archie Roach track on that one we did, we had to pay a couple of $1,000s for that, you know, and we had to do some crowdfunding to be able to pay for that. Through to often the smaller shaped pieces, we will just use generic music that you have to search for and find, you know, like copyright free, and it'll often cost $50 for the track, and it might be an hour or two of finding the right track that's going to work, and that's the reality if you're working in small budgets, is generally you don't have the capacity. One of our young producers now is he's taught himself, amongst other things, sound design. So there are some projects now, if we've got enough space in it, and he did the soundtrack for that film I just showed. He will do an original composition sort of, or sound ambience. But again, it's more time and money. So, you know, so many of these questions depend on, you know, how long's this piece of string in terms of your budgets and things like that. And so I guess the thing is to go, what story are we trying to tell? How can we tell it in the most engaging way that is going to impact an audience? And what's the right format for it? Is it a couple of 30-second campaign pieces? Is it a 1 3-minute piece? Is it a longer form doco? They're the questions they're the questions I'm going to ask you. If we sat down to chat, they're the sort of questions we would talk through. I'd get you to fill in one of these type of things, and we'd use that as the basis of a conversation to go, oh, well, how are we going to achieve that, and how much time and how much money? And sometimes I'll just say directly, have you got a budget? And you say, oh, and people, it's always that difficult question to, you know, people like often hold cards close to the chest. Sometimes people say, yeah, we've got 5,000. This is what we want to do. And I'll say, okay, well, that we can do. That means we can do a full day's shoot. We can do this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Or I'll say, or you tell me what you want and I'll give you a quote and we'll take it from there. So there's different ways and with every quote I ever do, I pretty much always say, there's moving parts in this quote. If it doesn't work, we can look at, you know, instead of doing a full day shoot, we do a half day shoot, or instead of having 5 interviews, we do 2, or, you know, whatever it is. So all those practical things. And hopefully, most of the time, we have great relationships with the organisations we work with. Like Michael said, in the space he works in, usually there's a nice natural fit because of the values alignment. And we really care about trying to do as good a job as we can, and we know you guys do too. So we try and make it the processes, you know, as enjoyable as we can along the way. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's all from me. I think I've rabbited on heaps, so unless anyone's got any last questions.
Yeah. From what you said, I've got 2 questions for people in the room. How many people bring someone in and are upfront with them about the budget when they come in to meet you? 1, 2, sometimes?
Yeah. It can vary, and I totally understand why.
Actually, sometimes it's the budget is, especially in non-profits, like you mentioned earlier, the budget is not clear.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't know how much you've got, or you don't know until you've talked through the idea. Yeah, that's true too. And like I said, it's not uncommon for us to work with organisations where they've got a fantastic idea and they know they want to develop these pieces about this particular issue and they want to do it, but this whole process, they don't have any budget at the moment. But they'll want to talk through the idea, they want to get a quote on what it would cost to do, and then they're going to go and try and get some money. And we've done that heaps. Another interesting thing that's been happening recently, and is the change, and it's happened for us quite naturally, is that there's quite a lot of projects we work on where we create a piece for an organisation, and particularly in the youth space, but we also mentor some people from that organisation to help make the film, and they learn the skills along the way. So, and that's for us, that's quite a natural process because our whole organisation, that's how we operate anyway. But what it, like, in fact, for Neighbourhood House, we recently worked with a woman called Julie in Richmond, and she came to us, and we just trained her to make the film about her organisation. So we gave her some sessions with her about the technical side of filmmaking. Then we had a couple of us went out on the shoot with her and with all our gear. She was there on the shoot, helping do the shoot, and then she edited at our studio with us providing technical support. And we just changed our pricing structure to reflect that. We just made up a different pricing structure. And I've done that quite a lot because it's just been natural. At the moment, we're working with a group from Cardinia Youth Program, an LGBT group, and they came up with a script, a fantastic concept, a kind of mockumentary where they're discovering about transgender through a brother. These two kids make a little documentary about their brother who's going transgender. And they'd written this script, and they came to us to help them refine the script, run some basic filmmaking sessions, and then have our team work with them on the shoot. Whilst they shot, they pressed record, they framed, but we were there with the gear, with the technical support. And then they're now coming every week, that they're at our studio today editing, So again, a different model. So there's different ways, so many different ways you can climb the mountain, so to speak.
How often do people who you work with come with a view, a clear view that their project, that the purpose of the project is to build empathy in the community with their target audience or with their target client group? As opposed to communicating what the organisation is about, but to consciously draw people in and feel something for those people and build that deeper connection. It kind of comes back to what you were saying about start with the story and let the kind of key messaging fall out of the story.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a sense most of the organisations want that to happen. It's how do you get there, and how. I mean, and sometimes that's that actual deeper level connection is harder to make unless you do focus on a story, I think. If it's just people talking about the organisation, interviews and overlay, you can still often get the feel for that, but usually it'll be a bit of a story. So it's knowing what is some stories that can represent you, I think, Michael. But sometimes it's just that people just go, we've got this great project. We just need our partners, we need our stakeholders, we need the community to know, and we've only can you just come in and work with us for a couple of hours and produce this little piece? And those pieces are still fantastic. So it's not that I think you can get a lovely little piece out of a 2 to 3 minute little piece that tells that story without having to do a huge amount of. You're not necessarily going to go in. It's not your scripted piece. It's not It's not that creative overlay, but you still get a nice reflection of what was done, and that makes sense. Any other questions? It's interesting for me, like looking back on this now, because I really, like I said, we've been in business since 2009, so it's nearly 8 years, and I think when I started, I was just like I said, I just wanted our kids to get our young people to get the opportunity to turn their creative skills into commercial skills, and to have this, and so our organisation was a platform for that, really. But yeah, so all this stuff around the stories we tell, the marketing, the branding, that for me I'm learning that as I go through doing this and working with organisations, but I'm certainly no expert at that side of it. What I really do care about is trying to represent that, or we do want to represent you guys well, and effectively, and so we really do care about that. So that's where we come in, is trying to do that within the limited, within the means that we have. But obviously, more time, the more budget, then the bigger the scale of what your ideas. But it doesn't necessarily mean you always do a better job. You can still do some great things with lean. If your ideas are strong.
So I have a question.
Yes.
With no budget.
Yeah.
So if you've got no budget at all.
No budget at
You've
all.
got your own.
Yeah.
Is it better to do something small and creative
Yeah.
than nothing?
I think so, personally. That's my view. But do try and be careful that you don't that the quality's not so bad that you kind of turn people off your message. So there's that difference between being too technically kind of poor, where people almost turn away because of that, and the story gets lost. But if you can still have some if the production values are strong enough that you can still get the story, I'd say go for it. I'm a great believer in doing things small, trying to do them as good quality as you can. Like, I'm a great believer in quality, it's but I'm also a great believer in just starting with small steps, And I know in our context, you make one film and it leads to another. You start with 15,000 funding to do this pilot, and then next thing you know, you're running, you're doing a year by year organisation. So things start small. The thing is to try and do good quality small things, I reckon, if you can. As good a quality as you possibly can, and the resources you can. But better something than nothing.
Apart from Windows on Dominica and iMovies, what software would you recommend?
We use Adobe, all Adobe stuff, and we use all Macs. And so we use there's a whole creative suite of Adobe, but Adobe Premiere Pro, we do all our editing in, and then there's all the kind of integrated other software, Adobe software that sort of sits around that and alongside it, Photoshop and all, there's a whole range of other programs that they all support each other, and that's fantastic. I personally don't know, I know Movie Maker a tiny bit, but I don't know the technicalities of it. But again, there is that the technology is available now that, people can, we couldn't have existed as an organisation 20 years ago, like the way that we run. It just wouldn't have been possible. And it's opening up. More and more people are getting access. But at the same time, there is a skill still involved in filmmaking, storytelling, and often people think because the technology is available, anyone can do it. I think that sometimes is an illusion, and sometimes people end up in a situation where they get someone to do it, and they end up 6 months later they're going, they still haven't delivered, and they still haven't, and the quality's really poor, and and it's more trouble than it's worth. So it is sometimes worth talking to people who are doing it consistently. That's a fair call. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Jeremy, thank you, John.
Thanks, folks.